The TurboGrafx-16 did not enjoy the same success in the US as the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, but that definitely doesn't mean that it didn't have some excellent RPGs. The RPG library isn't incredibly large on the TurboGrafx-16, so we'll be looking at every TurboGrafx-16 RPG released in the US. I want to point out that I'm making a distinction between the TurboGrafx-16 and the Turbo CD. And let's just go in the order of the ones that I had the most fun with to the ones that I had the least fun with. Let's get started. Dungeon Explorer. After Gauntlet, but before we started seeing too much action in the action RPG genre, we had Dungeon Explorer, which was quietly laying the groundwork on the TurboGrafx-16. Released in 1989, this top-down action RPG is like Gauntlet with a little more RPG added to it. It's frantic arcade combat mixed with RPG progression that gives the gameplay some pizzazz. But the thing that really brings it back to the Gauntlet feel is that you can play with up to 5 players simultaneously if you have the Turbo Tap. For its time, that was downright revolutionary. I think it sucks that I missed out on it. I imagine this game would be crazy fun with 4 other buddies farting around. Not to mention, I suck at this game and I could use a carry. Dungeon Explorer looks like a fairly standard fantasy romp. It's like just a more detailed Gauntlet. You pick from a set of character classes: fighter, thief, cleric, bard, halfling, and dwarf, which I think is pretty awesome, each with slightly different stats and magic. Then you're dropped into a hub and set loose to tackle dungeons, fight monsters, and ultimately save the kingdom from the evil monster known as Natas. Yes, that's Satan spelled backwards. Very, very subtle stuff. Maybe it's pronounced Natas, like tomatoes. So that's dumb. Don't put that in there. The game's movement and combat feels more arcade than RPG, really. You shoot projectiles of varying types like arrows, axes, darts, whatever, based on your class, instead of swinging swords or other weapons. Enemies come in waves, and you often find yourself dodging in every direction while trying to land hits and avoid being mobbed to death by the crowds. And that's hard. Holy smoke, this game is hard. It's chaotic, occasionally frustrating, but hey, it's exciting too. I mean, that's gotta count for something, right? The dungeons are surprisingly varied in layout and design, and there's a genuine sense of progression as you level up, earn more magic bottles, and unlock new areas. Something odd about this game, I think, is that I feel like it aggressively leans into multiplayer. Like, it's okay by yourself, but just having some warm bodies with you would make this game so much more manageable. But from what I hear, the game really comes alive with friends. Guess I'll never know. Up to 5 players can roam the dungeons at once, blasting away at monsters, scrambling for health items, and sometimes accidentally, or not so accidentally, stealing stuff from each other. It looks like pure, controlled chaos. But it also looks like the kind of game that ends in laughter, shouting, and someone being accused of sabotage. That's also the good stuff. That's the stuff that you likely remember from childhood, right? God, there's a reason I own 4 pairs of Donkey Kongas forever. I mean, there's a pair, I think, in the corner, actually. Regarding visuals, it's fine. It's standard fare. I like that the heroes are distinctive enough. The monsters are detailed enough. The big draw, honestly, is those boss sprites. I do like those quite a bit. Otherwise, the sprites are kind of small. Environments are fairly simple, but hey, they're distinctive. And there's a muted color palette that gives everything a slightly grimy medieval tone. And I don't necessarily think that was unintentional, or was it a mistake. Regarding gameplay though, it all moves smoothly, and the soundtrack, composed by Tsukasa Masuko of Megami Tensei fame, delivers some genuinely catchy tracks with a dark, adventurous vibe. Par for the course, but very good. One of Dungeon Explorer's greatest strengths is the lack of barrier to entry. Unlike many RPGs of the time, you don't need to manage complex inventories, you don't need to navigate lengthy dialogue trees or grind for hours. You don't really need much of a backstory or really any sort of understanding of any weird system. You jump in, choose a class, and dive into the next dungeon. That accessibility makes it perfect for pick up and play for friends. And it still holds up as a fun, no-frills romp if you've got a few friends. A TurboGrafx-16, a multi-tap, maybe 5 controllers laying around, or you could just emulate it with some buddies. It's going to be much easier that way. It's a little rough around the edges, but it's the type of game that's pretty rewarding once you figure out the gameplay rhythm. Hit detection can be a little spotty, and dungeons sometimes feel overly long, but those flaws likely wouldn't matter if you were playing in a room full of buddies just messing around with this old school dungeon crawlers. Oh, to be young again. Dungeon Explorer isn't a bad game at all. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and part 2 on the Sega CD both. Now, will I play it to completion? That's unlikely. It's sort of tough, but would I attempt to get a group of friends together to mess around with it one evening? Absolutely. Again, Dungeon Explorer is topping my list as the least fun, but that's okay. I imagine with more friends it will be incredibly fun. However, this next game is really, really awesome. Even if you're playing by yourself, it's not multiplayer, but even if you're playing by yourself, I think you'll appreciate this one. If you don't kill me for calling it an RPG, we'll see how it goes. Nootopia. Now, before you get your pitchforks and stuff, if you've been watching the channel, you know that I'm kind of weird about calling a game like this an RPG. However, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. It's a good game. And the TurboGrafx-16 didn't have a whole lot of traditional RPG stuff going on. So, Nootopia. Released in 1990 by Hudson Soft, Nootopia doesn't beat around the bush. It certainly doesn't hide where its inspiration is coming from. Clearly, it's Ghost Lion. No, of course not. It's The Legend of Zelda. In fact, calling it a Zelda clone is pretty accurate, but that's not the end of it. While the resemblance is undeniable, Nootopia does more than imitate. It delivers what is a surprisingly well-crafted action-adventure that proves that the TurboGrafx-16 can compete with Nintendo's crown, even if it doesn't quite dethrone Nintendo. Shoot for the moon, they say, and you'll land among the stars. Maybe that's what we're going for here. You play as Gisetta, I assume that's how you pronounce that, a brave warrior sent to rescue Princess Aurora and recover the 8 medallions that seal away the demon Durth. The story is run-of-the-mill fantasy, but it provides a solid enough framework for the real game, uncovering a map, exploring dungeons, and solving environmental puzzles. The structure is classic, split into 4 main world areas, each containing 2 dungeons filled with traps, enemies, and bosses. Regarding the gameplay, Nootopia checks all the right boxes. Combat is simple and feels precise. You swing your sword, toss bombs, and find new gear like fire rods that help you explore further and expand your combat repertoire, you might say. You can also find handy items like wings that take you back to the old lady, which I probably should have guessed before I did it. Curiosity killed the cat, I suppose. The hit detection is on point, pun intended, just like early Zelda titles, and sometimes it's to a fault. If they don't hit, hey, you just don't hit. Sorry. And there's a helpful compass system that points you towards your next objective in the overworld. In Zelda, this just worked in the dungeons, so this is a feature that was ahead of its time and keeps the experience feeling pretty laser-focused. One of Nootopia's greatest strengths is its sense of progression. With each dungeon conquered and medallions recovered, you'll feel noticeably stronger. Your health increases, you get new items and stuff along the way to mess around with, and the world begins to open up. It's a satisfying gameplay loop that encourages exploration without overwhelming the player with choices, and I can totally appreciate that. Graphically, the game is bright and just clean. It looks good. The overworld is colorful and calling out to adventurers with nicely animated sprites and some environmental variety from grassy fields to burning deserts to dank crypts. Oh yeah. It may not have the depth of later 16-bit games like it, namely Link to the Past, but it's charming in that classic late 80s, early 90s way. The music does a fine job being catchy, energetic, and often surprisingly moody, giving each area its own distinct feeling. If there is a problem to point out about Nootopia, it's that it's not Zelda. That's really about it. It's not terribly challenging, but not every game has to be so ridiculously difficult. The puzzles are pretty straightforward, the enemy patterns are predictable, making them not particularly tough, and the story doesn't do much to surprise. It's also, despite being an open exploration opportunity, kind of linear, especially compared to the open-ended design of Zelda that allows more player choice, particularly in that first Legend of Zelda game. But for players who can appreciate a clear path and a rewarding gameplay rhythm, that line that you walk can feel more like a feature than a flaw. Looking back at this game so many years after its release, I realized Nootopia wasn't just as Zelda-like for the TurboGrafx. It wasn't just that for TurboGrafx owners starved for adventure. It's not the McDonald's at home sort of bit. It was a legit game that could have been more of a contender with Zelda had the TurboGrafx been more popular in the US. While it never became a household name, heck, it's probably mostly in obscurity, as I don't hear too many people talk about it. Its quality speaks for itself. It's good. It may not be breaking the Zelda mold or burning down houses in Revolution, but it's enjoyable for sure. And for fans of Zelda that can't get enough of this type of game, that's more than enough. Nootopia, again, is a fun game. It's very fun, actually. The good news is that if that one's fun, and it's near the top of the list, what must be next? There's a lot of good games, a lot of fun games on the TurboGrafx-16. And so next we look at something that's a little more strategic, a little more RPG-ish. Let's look at Military Madness. Released in 1990 by Hudson Soft, Military Madness is a turn-based strategy game that takes itself pretty seriously. I mean, if you don't stop the axis of evil that's on the moon, they'll use a mega nuke to destroy the Earth if the Earth doesn't comply with their demands. Now that's not some sort of G.I. Joe sort of hyperbole. While it's intense stakes, Military Madness is a game that still holds up really well. It doesn't have the visual flair of newer games in the genre, big surprise there, right? It's a retro game. Or the wildly deep customization and tactics of stuff like Command & Conquer, but Military Madness earns its stripes through smart design, clever AI at times, and gameplay that's surprisingly addictive. Set in the not-so-distant future of 2089, there's a conflict over control of the moon between the Allied Union forces and the Axis Xenon Empire. It's kind of like World War II in space, I guess, as a oversimplification of World War II if you'll take it that way. But don't let the simple narrative backdrop mislead you. The real meat of Military Madness lies in its grueling, tile-based missions that test your strategic instincts at every turn. And there's 32 of them. Holy smokes. Each battle plays out on a hexagonal grid representing lunar terrain, and positioning is everything. Hills grant advantages, factories serve as reinforcement hubs, and bottlenecks become brutal kill zones if you're not careful. It's to the extent that terrain and position of your troops next to each other for benefits is absolutely crucial to success. Units range from light infantry to powerful tanks and artillery, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. There's no resource management or base building, which might sound like a limitation, but it actually focuses the gameplay around battlefield decisions and tactical positioning rather than economic micromanagement. And I feel that this puts it a little further in the RPG category than it might have been otherwise. There is tactical combat based on numbers, experience, and leveling up for units, so there's that. It might not have a wild story, too much story, or character progression, which is, pretty essential for most, role-playing games. But it's the tactical combat that doesn't feel too removed from something like Tactics Ogre or Final Fantasy Tactics. And this game is more squarely situated in games like Front Mission or Advance Wars. What makes Military Madness still worth playing is its emphasis on attrition. Oh boy. I must still have that Fire Emblem mindset or something because it pained me to lose troops and units in this game. But you basically can't avoid it. Shoot, at the end of each stage it even shows you a graph of each battle regarding this. The game rarely pulls its punches. It starts off easy enough, but if you fart around, you'll be cooked quicker than you expect. Your looming vulnerability makes you fully appreciate every victory. The difficulty curve climbs quickly, and mistakes are often punished with brutal efficiency. But that challenge is what makes this game so rewarding. Visually, the game is fine, it's okay. The best part, in my opinion, is the opening stuff and when you take over a building. Some cool looking pixel art stuff is going on there, I like it. Otherwise, the units are tiny and the color palette is muted. Grays, browns, blues, and this makes sense for a lunar battleground even if it's not particularly, eye candy. The map screens can be busy and sometimes difficult to navigate at first. I kept forgetting where things were on the screen since, the screen can scroll a little further, but the clean UI and helpful information windows assist with a steep learning curve. If you're not used to tactical games like this, of course. It's certainly not flashy, but it's functional and respectful of the player's needs during planning. The soundtrack is pretty good. It's not wildly memorable or anything, but it serves its purpose with minimalistic, militaristic drive that creates a tense atmosphere. It may not be one you'll hum afterwards, but it won't hinder your experience either. Military Madness also features a 2-player mode, which was likely a rarity for strategy games at the time. I can't think of too many that featured this, particularly on consoles. Local multiplayer setup offers fun with a buddy, and shows how the core mechanics are engaging even without the moon Nazis at work. Military Madness is not about the big moments or cinematic storytelling, it's about eking out a win when your back's against the wall. It's not the wildest RPG romp on the TurboGrafx-16, but it's a fun game to check out to see an older but good tactical game with RPG elements. Again, a very fun game and one that would probably be even better with multiplayer. But this next game leans more heavily into the RPG element and into the fantasy element. So we're moving from military into a fantasy cavern, if you will, into, I guess, a castle after that. But we're talking about the game Kadash. Now, I've talked about Kadash for the Sega Genesis in another video, but this one is slightly different. Released for the TurboGrafx-16 in 1991, Kadash is a hybrid of side-scrolling action and RPG mechanics that delivers a surprisingly engrossing experience. Especially if you like arcade-style games with a little fantasy RPG thrown in, because, well, that's what it is. Originally an arcade game made by Taito, the game was adopted by consoles like crazy, and apparently, the TurboGrafx-16 version is often remembered as one of the closest to the original arcade game. Kadash is sort of a medieval-themed Metroidvania, but one that's not terribly complicated. It's a mix of that big sprite arcade platforming and level progression through gaining experience, gold, and gear. You choose one of 4 character classes, fighter, mage, priest, or ninja, and set off on a journey to rescue a kidnapped princess and defeat the evil Balrog. And that's a pretty lofty goal, even for old Gandalf. The action happens after you jump into the underground cavern beneath the castle, and it doesn't mess around. You move through the screens, hacking through slime, zombies, and various fantasy beasts, all while waiting for your experience bar to slowly tick upward. It's an RPG in the most distilled sense. Fight monsters, level up, buy stuff in towns, and repeat. But it's that grind that is probably going to appeal to you folks as it did for me. The arcade roots keep things moving at a quick pace. Kadash never bogs you down in menus or with too much exposition. A monster, you say? Let's go kill it. Dialogue is minimal, shops are straightforward, and progression is linear. You can move around a bit and explore slightly off the beaten path, but it's not much, and I'm okay with that. Remember, this game would be munching your quarters if it was still on arcade. I mentioned in my Sega Genesis video how bad the names are in this game. Kingdom of Derzur. Derzur? I guess that's how you pronounce that. One fateful night, he kidnaps the princess from the royal keep in Derzar, the capital of Derzur. Desperate to save his daughter and his kingdom, the aging King Dilzarl vows to reward anyone who can rescue Salvasa with his entire realm. Good news, it's still here! And that's okay. How often do you really get to say Dilzarl anyway? What makes Kadash special to me is the pixel art. It's vibrant and detailed, with some dank cavern backdrops, torch-lit corridors, and monsters straight from the D&D Monster Manual. The music is catchy, dramatic, and perfectly tuned for adventuring, often adding a real sense of urgency and adventure as you go deeper. You can do it! Combat can be a little frustrating according to which character you picked, and according to how far you are in the game. It sort of sucks getting started with a few of these. The fighter plays as you would expect, sword swinging and tanking hits, and it is much easier than the others. The mage introduces some ranged elemental stuff, and his part becomes much easier later on. What you see is what you get, and what is here is light. And I think that the game doesn't really have many difficulty spikes. The game paces the difficulty well as you get deeper into the game's 5 main areas. Kadash really straddles the line between arcade simplicity and RPG depth. You won't find elaborate party building systems or sprawling open world maps, but you will find a lean, compelling loop of fight, upgrade, and explore that's hard to put down. Dying sends you back to the last end that you stayed at, which adds stakes but never feels too punishing. And while the story is bare bones, the world itself has just enough charm and mystery to keep you hooked. It wasn't too long ago that I played completely through Kadash on my little Mayu Mini Plus or whatever I was using at the time. But then I did the Sega video and I played Kadash and I felt myself compelled to keep playing. And then I finally stopped. And when I started recording footage for this game, I kept playing. It's hard. It's a hard game to put down. It's really enjoyable and I recommend it. If you're looking for a much more difficult challenge, but one that is still super fun. If you enjoy failing, you have to really enjoy getting your butt kicked. I have to recommend this insanely fun but difficult game, Dungeons & Dragons: Order of the Griffin. By the early 90s, Dungeons & Dragons was already a common household name, a pop culture force that changed and even arguably helped create tabletop gaming and role-playing games. It didn't stop there either, as it also affected fantasy video games and even Saturday morning cartoons. It only made sense that Dungeons & Dragons: Order of the Griffin would show up just about everywhere, and the TurboGrafx-16 was no exception. Now, being a system exclusive and only available in the US where D&D started, you'd probably expect some excellence. Instead, what we got was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of quality control, but it's a surprisingly faithful interpretation of the basic D&D rule set. It's not flashy, it's not fast-paced, holy smokes! But if you're craving some classic D&D flavor, there's old school charm galore. Just be ready to die, and reset, and resurrect, shout at the sky, miss everything you swing at, that sort of stuff. Developed by Westwood Associates, yes, the same Westwood Studios that would go on to make Command & Conquer, and the same Westwood Studios that made the excellent Eye of the Beholder series. I particularly like the Sega CD version. Order of the Griffin is a turn-based RPG set in the land of Karamikos, I suppose that's how you pronounce that. A lesser-known but lore-rich region in the Mistara campaign setting. Vampires, werewolves, and ancient evils abound, and it's your job to assemble a party of pre-made folks and stop a vampire lord bent on spreading darkness across the realm. Can't be doing that. In your pre-made character pool, you'll find your typical fantasy archetypes. Fighter, cleric, mage, thief, dwarf, elf, and halfling. You know the drill. That stuff. There's no character creation, which might disappoint hardcore D&D fans, but each party member has distinct stats, spells, and equipment, so there's room for strategic planning, especially as each class has 3 different versions with different stats to choose from. It speeds up the character creation and gets you right into the meat of the game, and hey, I can appreciate that. Gameplay is broken into exploration and combat phases. Exploration takes place in a first-person perspective, reminiscent of Wizardry or Eye of the Beholder. You move tile by tile through towns and dungeons, talking to NPCs, maybe solving some puzzles. To be honest, I never really made it that far in this game because it is hard. But you continue this sort of stuff, hunting down the next threat. When enemies appear, the game shifts into a top-down tactical grid where combat unfolds in turn-based fashion. Positioning, spell usage, and party composition all matter, and battles can be surprisingly difficult regardless of how prepared you may think you are. So you got 3 HP on your mage? Tough! Rats can hit for 3 damage too. Sucks to be a mage. 10 HP on your fighter? Giant crabs outside of town can one-shot you. Actually, there was quite a bit of one-shotting happening in my attempts, and this is super frustrating. I mean, it can be hilarious, but it's also so frustrating. If you get a lucky hit, heck yeah. If your enemy gets a lucky hit, well, I guess we're spending 250 gold to raise you at the temple. Hope nobody in the party wanted to eat today. The presentation is modest, even for the TurboGrafx. Sprites are small and somewhat crude, but it works. The color palette leans into moody purples, grays, browns, fitting for a world overrun by the undead. It matches. The music, while a bit repetitive, has a tense, ominous tone that helps sell the adventure's darkness. It's not a game you play for eye candy. It's one you play because you want to crawl through crypts, kill some orcs, and turn some undead. And that's what you're going to get here. What's impressive is how much classic D&D flavor the developer squeezed into this game. Spells like sleep and turn undead function as they would in the tabletop game. Magic users need to rest to regain spells, which can be done about anywhere, but you run the risk of being attacked in the wild, which is much like D&D. The writing, while brief, is soaked in that vintage style, dramatic, cryptic, and focused on the danger at hand. Order of the Griffin, for better or worse, is very much a product of its time. There is minimal hand-holding. You're likely to find yourself just like me, dying over and over, but if you learn from your mistakes, the game opens up more and more. It's honestly so much fun, even if it can get frustrating sort of quick. You might find yourself eat up in random battles pretty quickly, or getting one shot by enemies despite your gear. Lucky rolls are lucky rolls, and unlucky rolls are... yeah. But if you're willing to put the time in, maybe read a guide and lean into the atmosphere, it's worth a few hours of your time, even if it's just to enjoy how old school D&D it is. It may not be the best known D&D game. Folks, if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you're enjoying the content. If you found a game to add to your backlog, I'm sorry, or congratulations, one of the two. If that's what you're here for, wonderful. If you didn't intend to add to your backlog, again, I'm terribly sorry. Either way, thank you for your patronage. My channel has been growing by leaps and bounds, and it's all because of you guys. Thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this content, I encourage you to check out some of my other content. It's very similar to this style. And if you find that you enjoy that, I encourage you to subscribe. I try to put out a video every couple of weeks. I love reading comments, so if there's anything you'd like to share about this video, I'd love to hear it. Let's carry on. Dragon's Curse. I think Dragon's Curse originally released in 1989 on the Sega Master System. It's kind of confusing with how many times it's been renamed and ported. It was published by Hudson Soft on the TurboGrafx-16, and it must be generally received as well as I receive it, because again, it has been ported a lot. Dragon's Curse is more than your typical curiosity on some older systems. It's a genuinely fantastic Metroidvania-style platformer that was ahead of its time in so many ways. While Zelda 2 and Castlevania 2 were still finding their footing in the genre, Dragon's Curse felt remarkably confident, and that's probably why it keeps popping back up. I, of course, bring it up here not only because of its RPG-like elements, like character progression through armor and heart upgrades, but because, once again, it's genuinely fantastic in every iteration that I've tried it. You begin the game at what feels like the end of another adventure, storming a dragon's castle and defeating a big old baddie mecha-dragod thingy. But your triumph is short-lived. You're cursed and transformed into a half-human, half-lizard creature. From there, the game unfolds as a quest to regain your original form, with each new dragon you defeat turning you into a different beast, each with its own abilities. It's the Curse of the Dragons, and oh yeah, now the title makes sense, right? It's a brilliant gimmick that never feels like a gimmick. You're not just switching forms for novelty. Each transformation unlocks new areas and abilities, adding ways to explore and a different approach to combat. The progression is beautifully non-linear, but still pretty focused for such a retro title. As you gain new forms, Mouse Man, Piranha Man, Lion Man, and so on, You can backtrack to previous places you couldn't reach before. As an example, Mouse Man can run along special walls, Piranha Man can explore underwater sections, and Lion Man can devastate different looking blocks by swinging a sword. It's this combination and use of new abilities and old locations that makes Dragon's Curse so amazing to explore. It scratches the same itch that Super Metroid would refine years later in, well, like a lighter tone. I like to think it's a little simpler than Super Metroid, but it's still so enjoyable. Combat is extremely straightforward, but it's so responsive. The hit detection is tight, and the variety of enemies and environmental hazards keeps things engaging. There's a bit of a rhythm to combat that you get used to in each form, and to reiterate, there's also a surprising amount of RPG-like progression here. Earn gold, buy gear, upgrade your health, and that, along with a short supply of RPGs on the TurboGrafx-16 released in the US, is what lands it on my list here. Visually, Dragon's Curse is flat-dab gorgeous in my retro heart's opinion. I was tempted to say here on the TurboGrafx-16, but honestly, I think every iteration that I have seen so far is beautiful in its own way.
Yes, words can't bring me down.
The sprites are large, colorful, and charming, and the environments are bright and varied. From desert palaces to underwater ruins, the sort of places you'd expect in just about any video game with varied settings from yesteryear. The TurboGrafx palette really stands out here, giving the game a cartoon-like quality that I adore. The soundtrack, too, is an earworm. Years, folks. Years later, I'm telling you, years later, I still find myself humming this song. The music is catchy and energetic, capturing the spirit of adventure perfectly. Despite the wild amount of re-releases, this game still seems to be a stranger banger. He said it! It's lighthearted, yes, but it's also quite melancholic. It's a little lonely sometimes. Being cursed isn't just a plot device, it shapes the identity of the entire game. You're always transforming, always changing, and that can keep you from being whole. You're never quite there along your journey. For a game with such cheerful visuals, there's an undercurrent of solitude that gives it surprising depth. And I want to shut up there before I fall into my old analysis videos ways. Maybe one day. This game feels structurally decades ahead of its time. If you've managed to avoid this one in its several re-releases, consider this your wake-up call. It's wonderful. I've gone on and on about Dragon's Curse, and it deserves it. It's wonderful. It's so much fun. So what could possibly be ahead of that, right? Well, I got two games. This next game is very much more traditional RPG, but it is so weirdly addictive and fun. It's so enjoyable. When I first saw some screenshots, I thought there's no way. I was dreading playing this game. But when I started recording footage, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop. So we go from this arcade-like platformer RPG thing to a dungeon crawler. I'm talking about Double Dungeons. Double Dungeons has no right to be as fun as it is. Again, I actually dreaded playing this one. I thought it was going to be a slog. I thought it was going to be boring, but holy moly, it is addictive. It's a first-person dungeon crawler that's almost primitive, but it's also extremely ambitious. It was released in 1990 for the TurboGrafx-16, and by my understanding, it's often remembered less for its gameplay polish, and more for being one of the very few RPGs on the system to offer simultaneous two-player co-op. You know what? I didn't even try that mode out. We're gonna have to check out this dude's footage of it. Let's take a look here. Yeah. Oh yeah, that looks awesome. That looks like so much fun. But even as a single player, I got so much enjoyment out of this game. I started it, saw the dungeon stage selection, and said, what? Oh well, I just started at 1. In messing around with it, I grumpily said stuff like, wow, every wall looks the same. There's no attack animations, and stuff like that. But I didn't stop playing, and I kept playing, and I kept playing. And I told my wife I'd restart the dryer in just a few minutes, and I never did. The gameplay loop, and loop it certainly is classic dungeon crawler stuff. You pick a scenario and jump into a grid-based maze filled with monsters, a few shops, some inns, experience points, and a major grind session. Combat is turn-based but fast, like really fast. If you want to spam the button to attack, you can do that. There's not really a whole lot you can do in combat besides eat a potion or an apple. So whack away, Jim. Whack away. Enemies tend to pop up like cardboard cutouts. You get a line about how dangerous the fight might be according to what you're fighting, and then you engage in Mortal Kombat. It's functional, but it's weirdly satisfying. What apparently makes Double Dungeon stand out is right there in the title. Again, you and a friend can explore the same dungeon together in a split screen. It's not networked, it's not drop in, drop out, it's pure old school side-by-side couch co-op. That feature was incredibly rare in RPGs at the time, especially in a genre so often defined by solitude and stat crunching, which again, I did by myself. That's basically the dream, isn't it? 2 players navigating a maze, fighting separate monsters, yelling directions or warnings at each other as you both try not to get lost, which inevitably you will. There are 22 dungeons to play through, most of which are standalone with simple objectives like defeat the boss. A loose story ties some of them together, but the narrative is insanely thin, bordering on non-existent. Instead, the focus is on quick progression. You level up fast, buy new gear quickly, and power through enemies with an almost arcade-like tempo. If you die, guess what? You start over. You don't lose experience or items. You lose just your money. You don't lose experience or items, you just lose your money. And that sucks, but if you can get through the grind to get the items that you want from the shop, then you can just die and not sweat it too much because you get to keep the item. This makes it surprisingly accessible, especially for players who find classic RPGs too slow or obtuse. Again, this one can be ludicrously fast. You know, it's almost like 60-second Hero or 1-minute Hero or whatever it was for the PSP. Visually, Double Dungeons is nothing wildly special, but because it's so bland, any little change in the game is exciting. Seeing a new mob?
Nice.
Seeing a new boss?
Nice.
Heck, seeing a palette swap?
Nice.
The dungeon walls are insanely repetitive, the monsters are basic but kind of cool, and there's very little visual variety from one scenario to the next. Still, the clean UI and fast transitions keep things moving. The music, while repetitive, has a certain synthy charm. It fits the era and the atmosphere, even if it's not an earworm like the music from Dragon's Curse. I could see a real challenge to this game being the length, despite the suggestion that it only takes about 19 hours to finish, according to howlongtobeat.com. Yeah, okay. Folks, I played through this first level and I loved it. I felt like it was a perfect length for a level. After I beat that one, I decided to try out the password to the last level. Okay, it looks exactly the same. I'm back to level 1 and the enemies have changed a bit, and that's cool. Then I looked up the map for level 22. I'm not exaggerating when I say I looked mouth agape for a solid 20 seconds before I could react in any other way. This is insane. Look at this. Double Dungeons does not have an in-game map. I wish it did. Would it take away from the experience? Yeah, maybe. But just some better indicator of where I am would be amazing. Oh well, it's still fun. This, instead, is one of those games where you absolutely must draw a map or use someone else's map by the end. It just gets unreal. The walls blur together, the enemies offer little variation sometimes. Certainly not enough to reliably be landmarks or anything. I bet this would be much easier with a second player. At least then you could have like a wingman shouting, "Don't go that way," or "I found the boss, the shop, the innkeep, whatever." That really seems to be the way to play this game, but holy smokes, I'm telling you, I recommend it as a single player experience too. It's a ton of fun that you can just pick up and play level by level. This next game on the list might draw some ire from people because it's, again, one of those that's like, is it really an RPG? Maybe. Does it matter? Not really. There's so few TurboGrafx-16 RPGs in the US. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. But I'm talking about a super fun game I can't recommend enough. Incredibly enjoyable and extremely familiar to basically anybody on this list, if not by title, then by gameplay style. I'm talking about Nootopia II. Nootopia II was released in 1992 by Hudson Soft. It's a legitimate, straight-up sequel to the first game. Only a slight spoiler here, the hero wins in the first game, and hey, guess what? You're his descendant. Nootopia 1 flew its Legend of Zelda-inspired flag proudly, but Nootopia 2 doesn't just imitate the Legend of Zelda and do a decent job with it, it refines the first experience and it does a fantastic job of improving on basically everything. Building on the solid foundation of the first game, Nootopia 2 has smoother gameplay, more detailed visuals, and a slightly more dynamic story, making it one of the more memorable action-adventure entries in the TurboGrafx library, and of course, one that I don't particularly mind to call or hear called an RPG. It's certainly part of the family, even if twice removed, which is kind of sexy. I promise I'm kidding, so shame on me, like I was... The stereotype for my accent is rough, but it's not nearly as rough as people would have you think. Set a year, I guess, after the original, Nootopia 2 puts players in the boots of Giusetta's son, who sets off to rescue his father and stop the return of the evil demon Dearth. His father, who hasn't been heard from, is starting to worry people. It's sort of that Dragon Quest III vibe of, your dad is a great hero, where is he? Nobody knows. The generational shift is mostly thematic, but it gives the sequel a sense of continuity and purpose. The world is bigger, and the stakes are high, if not higher, and the journey is more engaging from the outset. It's just better, I think. Gameplay is still that top-down and sword-swinging stuff, but everything feels a bit more responsive. Movement is smoother, hit detection is tighter, and enemy behavior is slightly more varied. The dungeons return full of keys, switches, traps, and boss fights, and the overworld is again divided into distinct regions that reward thorough exploration. The sequel introduces diagonal movement, a small but significant quality of life improvement, and it helps the controls feel less stiff than in the original. One of Nootopia II's best upgrades is in its presentation. This game looks good, y'all. The environments are more detailed with better use of color and texture. Forests look foresty, caves look cavier, I guess, and generally it helps things be more atmospheric. It's just lovely. Character sprites are crisper, I feel, as they seem to have a little more detail. Animations are cleaner, and the overall art direction is an obvious step up. Musically, the game continues with catchy and thematic tunes, with a soundtrack that alternates between adventurous and ominous, always fitting the mood of the current region. It's a lot of driving adventure music that makes you want to, adventure. The story, while basic by today's standards, has more going on than the original. NPCs offer helpful hints, sometimes too often, as everyone wants to tell you where to go and what to do. I don't particularly like bombing a wall or finding a secret cave expecting something amazing and just getting some obvious advice. Fire hurt. Don't eat cheese before noon. This game has the same trope that we've all come to love or hate with the need to rescue and restore, but that's okay because the gameplay is tight even if the story is not. If there is a critique to be made, it's that Nootopia II doesn't dramatically break new ground. It improves upon the original in almost every way, but it doesn't really do anything different. That's not a terrible thing, but if you're looking for innovation in the gameplay, you're not really going to find it. The puzzles, while satisfying, remain fairly traditional. Bosses are more engaging but still follow classic attack patterns that won't stump seasoned players. And while the game is longer and a bit more challenging, it's still a fair outing. Well-paced and just challenging enough to put you in the dirt a few times. I'm not trying to downplay it, Nootopia II rocks. I actually thought while I was playing it, I think I'd like to own this one. And I went to eBay to check. Okie dokie, that's not happening. I mean, that's fair, I guess, that price. It's an obscure sequel to an obscure game on an obscure system that's super fun. Nootopia 2 is more than just a run-of-the-mill sequel, though. It's a genuine evolution of its first game. It shows how iteration can lead to polish, how familiar mechanics can be owned to a fine edge, and how a sequel can honor its roots while getting rid of some of the rough edges. Again, I hate to beat this dead horse, but if you like 2D Zelda games, you're likely going to enjoy this one as well. 2D Zelda games are like Big Red.
If you don't chew Big Red, then you.